I'm very excited about the next part of the day. I love a good debate. So thank you, Sue. So we're turning now to the first of the two big debates, where, as promised, I just know this is going to get very lively. Our first motion is this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. Now, there's food for thought. The debate will be hosted by the Literific Debating at Queen's, the university's historic debating society, and chaired by Professor Kevin Brown. The format will see two teams present arguments for and against with audience feedback and your vote at the end to decide who made the most persuasive case. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to the debaters. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Mandy. My name is Daniel Devenney, and I'm the president of the Literary and Scientific Society of Queen's University Belfast. And can I just say that it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for attending today. So just first, a bit about our society. We are the oldest society on Queen's. We were founded in 1850, so we had our 175th anniversary this year. We're also one of the most active societies on campus, and you'll see in the tables in front of you there, we have our term card of all the exciting motions that we will be discussing and have already discussed this year. And on the other side as well, you'll notice that there are events that we're taking part in, events, socials, and of course our great debates, of which this is one. And then also at the Lyrific, we're very big on discussion and discourse. And actually how we got involved with Victim Support NI. So last year we had the pleasure of having Victim Support NI as our charity, so we were involved in fundraising for them. And this year, can I just say on behalf of our society that we are incredibly delighted to be here today, to be involved in such a fantastic event. I think the work that we try to do and the work that Victim Support NI try to do are very similar, and it's kind of culminated in this event today because there are three key things that you need to know about a debate before we get started. The first is, and it's already been alluded to, that everyone has a voice, everyone has a seat at the table, and as a society that promotes debate and free speech on campus, that's something that's very important to us. That all the speakers that you see today at this podium will have 7 minutes where you will hear their own experiences and examples drawn from their own backgrounds. It's really important that we give students that opportunity. The second thing is listening. A lot of people think that debating is just standing up and giving a monologue, but we're all about dialogue, discussion, and of course debate at the Lyrific. We think that it's very important that listening is a key part of debating, something that people might not recognise, that people aren't just going up and essentially speaking for 7 minutes at a brick wall, but instead that they're listening to what each other has to say. And we think that that's something that's incredibly important in such like a divisive and polarising political climate today. And then finally as well, we may be the oldest society on campus, but we're all about discussing the incredibly relevant issues of the day. And we think that there's no issue more prevalent right now at the moment than this emerging hate crime legislation, which brings me on to our debate. This House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. So before we get started, I'm just going to explain the rules, and then we're going to do a vote of prior opinion. So we have our proposition here, 3 speakers, and we have our opposition, another 3 speakers. Each will take it in turn to approach the podium and to give a speech for 7 minutes. The first minute and last minute of their speeches are protected time, which is indicated by our bell. Professor, would you mind ringing the bell for us over there, please? There we go, thank you. That means the 5 minutes in between are a chance for the other side of the debate to interject and challenge speakers on their points while they're speaking with a POI. That is a point of information. We like to keep our POIs nice and short to give the speaker plenty of time, so this will be 15 seconds maximum, and then once the speaker has either declined a POI or accepted a POI, other speakers must then wait 15 seconds before they can offer another POI. So those are the rules of our debate. I must say as well that this discussion is not just to be had on the stage. We will be giving you as members of the audience an opportunity after the debate to pitch questions to our panel. And finally, well, first of all, I'd like to thank as well our guest chair, Professor Kevin Brown, and his amazing speech earlier. And the only thing that needs to be done before we start our exciting debate is a vote of prior opinion. So this is your chance to express your opinion on the motion as it stands before you hear our speakers. So, as I said, the motion is this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. So can I have all those who wish to vote for the proposition who believe hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose to raise their hands, please? Okay, so that is 48. Can I have all those in the opposition, so all those who do believe that hate crime legislation is fit for purpose, to raise their hands, please? And considerably easier to count. Okay, that is 3. And then can I finally have all those who would like to abstain from the motion to raise their hands, please? Okay, so that is 4. So the results of our vote of prior opinion, we have 48 for the proposition, 3 for the opposition, and 4 for abstentions. So the proposition carries it. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Kevin Brown, who is my fellow co-chair, to introduce our panel and then make a start to the debate. Thank you.
I'm a bit jealous that I didn't get a gown, but and I should say that as an undergraduate student, I was never brave enough to do this. So I really admire the fact that they're here today and helping to bring alive this important subject. Okay, and in terms of the rules, of course, it'll be Daniel. It'll be guiding us. But so we have the 3 for the proposition, 3 for the opposition. We have Beth, Lee, and James. For their proposition. The opposition, we have Florence, Dhivyah, and Rosa. And so we'll kick off, and I'll return to my seat. But I believe it's going to be Beth joining us first. Is that right? Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here today. My name is Beth, and I'm here today to open the case for the proposition on the motion this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. This debate is incredibly topical now, with new legislation likely to be tabled and debated in the Northern Irish Assembly this year, but also with hate crime being on the rise in Northern Ireland, this year being dubbed as the Year of Hate, at least in the BBC. And this idea of the Year of Hate underscores our entire argument. We are not here today to argue that hate crime legislation should not be a thing. We are completely supportive of legislation that effectively tackles hate and actually protects the peoples it claims to. What we are saying is that the laws currently in place to address this problem are ineffective, incomplete, and ultimately unfit for the role they are meant to serve. Now, to begin, what exactly is a hate crime? According to UK law, a hate crime is any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice towards an individual based on certain protected characteristics. These are race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and transgender identity. The purpose of hate crime legislation is to acknowledge the greater harm caused by prejudice-motivated crime, not just to individuals, but to the entire community, and to provide legal tools to ensure these crimes are recognised, prosecuted, and punished accordingly. So how come we are in the Year of Hate? Hate crime legislation laws in Northern Ireland are significantly behind the rest of the UK. The current framework is built on the Criminal Justice Order 2004, which is, fun fact, older than me, where a sentence can be increased if the offence is found to be aggravated by hostility based on race, based on the protected characteristics. However, and this is key, they are not a separate criminal offence. Unlike in England and Wales, where hate crime is a standalone crime, in Northern Ireland, the hate element is simply a factor in sentencing. This means it can be often can be and is ignored, downplayed, or dropped as part of a trial. So say, for example, someone is in a race-based motivated attack. The offence is the attack itself, not the racial kind of prejudice behind it, and oftentimes is not prosecuted as part of it. So it does not go down as a hate crime, but rather just an assault or whatever. So in 2020, the Independent Hate Crime Legislation Review, led by Judge Desmond Marinan, concluded that Northern Ireland's hate crime laws is not fit for purpose and called for significant reform. 5 years later, the hate is at a record level. The new legislation tabled at Stormont takes its findings into account, better late than never, I suppose, but as it stands alone, current legislation is completely ineffective. And again, I've since then managed to finish my junior cert, leaving cert, and I'm now in college, so long time between that. And then, even where the law does provide protection, it is rarely applied effectively. The the Public Prosecution Service reports that hate crime cases in Northern Ireland have a very low conviction rate, and when prosecutions do occur, the hate motivation is often not pursued, as I mentioned. In fact, prosecutors often rely on general offences like assault or criminal damage, leaving out the hate element altogether. But why is this important? If the crime is successfully prosecuted, why does it matter that the hate element is left out? Victims are denied justice that recognises the full extent of their experience, and communities lose faith in the legal system's ability to protect them, as the underlying issue from that hate is not fully dealt with, or from that crime. In 2023, for instance, over 1,200 hate incidents were reported to the PSNI, but only a small fraction resulted in prosecutions where the hate motivation was recognized or sentenced. This isn't a problem of enforcement, it's a sign that the legislation itself lacks clarity and power needed to hold perpetrators accountable. And yet, when a hate crime is prosecuted, can be prosecuted, police and prosecutors often fail to apply them. The Marinan Review found widespread confusion among police officers, prosecutors, and even judges on how to identify and pursue these crimes. Many frontline officers do not receive adequate training, and therefore little consistency on how these crimes are recorded or flagged. In practice, this means that two identical incidents, say an assault motivated by homophobia, might be treated entirely differently depending on who the reporting officer is. One case might be investigated as a hate crime, and the other might not. This kind of inconsistency damages public trust and makes justice feel hollow. One of the main reasons for hate crime legislation is that it sends a powerful societal message that hate will not be tolerated, and that attacks on one community are attacks on us all. But the laws now are unclear, inconsistent, and inconsistently enforced, and full of loopholes that do not send the message. Instead, they send the opposite, that some victims count more than others, that prejudice can be overlooked, and that justice is optional. Northern Ireland already suffers from a lack of faith in the police and justice system. There are already struggles by groups to go to police forces in the first place. Their experience should not be marred by more ineffective policing and confusion by law enforcement about what the law actually is. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not against the idea of hate crime legislation. But the motion is not about the ideal, it's about the reality. And the reality is, in Northern Ireland, the legislation is outdated, incomplete. It is applied inconsistently and misunderstood by those meant to enforce it, and fails to provide justice for victims or deter future harm. In short, it's not fit for purpose. But what is the answer? Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. The legislation's Dormant is a bright spot in this year of hate. With effective legislation in the future, with a clearer definition of a hate crime that allows it to be dealt with properly, and acknowledgement that the hate crime is a serious social harm, so many of the issues that are discussed above can be dealt with. Not completely, of course. There is still systemic issues to be dealt with, but what Northern Ireland needs right now is something hopeful, and that something is closer than we think. I thank you for listening, and I beg you to propose.
Okay, then I invite Florence to the podium.
So, I'd like to say well done to Beth for her amazing speech. I'd also like to consider summer 2024. So during this time, there were riots in cities across the UK, Cardiff, London, Belfast, of course. Australia had also issued travel warnings for citizens visiting the UK. For me personally, I had gotten my first car sorted, so I was ready to drive. Riots, they weren't really on my mind. But to be honest, I still very much remember the warnings I'd gotten from my mum to avoid going outside. Although I wanted to show off to my friends how much of a great driver I was, I'm not, I also understood that it was a really dangerous time to be out. Since then, I've also realized that something very important came out of these riots. A realization that yes, our government is trying its best to implement, to prevent something like this ever happening again. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Florence, and today me and my team would like to oppose the House's belief that current hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. We believe that it is. So I also want to clarify what it is exactly that we mean by hate crimes. Offenses which are motivated by hostility on the basis of race, religion, including sectarianism, and age. To go back on the Southport riots specifically, the crackdown was strong, unexpectedly so. Since July 29, 2024, the police had made 1,840 arrests, of which 1,103 were charged. The Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Parkinson, confirmed on August 2024 that the first charges of riot had been authorized, and this means that, under Section 1 of the 1986 Public Order Act, rioters could be punished with a fine or up to 10 years of imprisonment. Also, Part 3 of the Public Order Act specifically addresses racial hatred, noting that a person is guilty of an offense if they use threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior through which racial hatred is likely to be stirred up. The Sentencing Act of 2020 also requires courts to treat racial hostility as an aggravating factor and thus increase the sentence for any conviction where it is proven. Thus, if we look at the case of David Wilkinson, he was a part of the Southport riots, he would be charged with racially aggravated criminal damage and violent disorder due to attacking a car containing 3 Romanian men. He would receive one of the longest sentences, being jailed for 6 years. Additionally, the reaction to the riots brought about a new precedent for punishing those who had encouraged hate crimes on social media. Jordan Parler was sentenced to 20 months in jail for a Facebook post calling users to attack a hotel housing asylum seekers. Yes, initially the police service were not prepared, but it's clear that they reacted with to implement frameworks to ensure that these people would be punished by law. So how can the proposition argue then that hate crime legislation is inefficient when this clearly depicts it working in action? In the specific context of NI, even while there's no specific hate crime legislation by name, this does not mean that I can go and incite violence on whoever I want just because they're of a different sexual orientation or race. I believe that there are still measures in place to prevent hate crimes and to punish those who commit them. Indeed, the current legislation we have in place does provide strong legal protections and is fit for purpose. Under Article 2 of the Criminal Justice Order 2004, there is provision for enhanced sentences when offenses are aggravated by hostility on racial, religious, sexual orientation, or disability grounds. The legislation that is there is not just symbolic, but can also hold real value and real protection. This is clear during the 2006 trial of Johnson and White, who were found guilty of attacking a victim in Enniskillen. The attack was proven to be an example of sectarian hostility, which led to harsher sentencing, with both men getting 3 years in jail. Also, what does one count to be the purpose of legislation? Is it solely to punish the offender, or should it also entail the victim receiving proper help? Legislation here promotes collaboration to ensure that the process is sensitive to the victim and that they are also victim-centered. To say that legislation is fit for purpose means to not only prevent crimes, but to also support the victim, who is definitely going through a very difficult time. So the PSNI is a key partner in the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, or the HCAS, advocating for victim empowerment. This was confirmed during Hate Crime Awareness Week 2025. So the HCAS and the PSNI depicted how the system would work and how they would work together to ensure that the victim was the center of it all, not just the offender. So Rosa will also further address how we need to address the root issues behind hate crimes. So during this week, the PSNI and the HCAS had shown victims being guided through the justice process and reassuring them that their cases would be taken seriously and that they were listened to. They do have a voice. In line with legislation and a duty to protect citizens and victims of hate crimes, this is what a fit-for-purpose system looks like. So let me make it clear. Legislation can never be perfect. It can never fully prevent any and all hate crimes from happening. But I do strongly believe that it is fit for purpose currently, and it does allow people like me, my friends, my family, my community to roam the streets safely without a constant fear that we would become the next BBC headline as a nameless statistic in a hate crime report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we welcome Lee for the proposition to the podium.
Mr. President, esteemed Chair and Professor, guests and members, my name is Lee Walker and I appear for the proposition that hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. While some in the opposition may try to direct you to the noble pursuits of the legislation, that's inconsequential to the motion. We're all united here that hate crime is wrong. I am a Newton Abbey resident, so I'm well used to our tendencies. I'm also a photojournalist, so the PSNI regard me as a liability, likely to get caught up while trying to get photos. I'm also a scout leader who has had to cancel nights due to the riots in Newton Abbey. And this is kids that are not able to receive scout values being taught to them. That of belief, care, integrity, respect and cooperation, all of which would go so far in helping to prevent hate crime. Florence asks, what is the point of legislation? I have a different answer: to uphold the rule of law. And whilst legislation admittedly cannot be perfect despite legislators' and drafters' intents, it can uphold the rule of law. We must look at the purpose of the legislation. The legislation's intent is to create an offence that is aggravated in some regard either during sentencing or during charge. This introduces the question of, well, what is hate? As we've already highlighted, this is vague legislation. This is vague intent. We have some kind of vague estimate on what a hate crime bill or hate crime act would look like in Northern Ireland. We have the, the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act, which Section 1 provides at the time of committing an offence or immediately before or after doing so, the offender demonstrates malice and ill will. Well, what is that malice and ill will? Well, I hate to point it out, but crime is very rarely motivated through love. It is a matter of, as any time we involve crime, we automatically bring into effect a person's right to liberty, a person's right to freedom from inhumane and degrading treatment, and no punishment without law. These are all European Convention rights that must be engaged anytime we deal with crime. We also bring in the rule of law, which Lord Bingham helpfully summarises. Well, helpfully, I'm a law student, so he didn't helpfully summarise it. Give me more work to do. The law must be accessible, intelligible, clear, predictable, and it must be made on discretion and fairness. Hate crime legislation only serves to obfuscate the law, unfortunately. The meaningless void that is hate only serves to surrender power from the legislature and into the hand of judges. And while some may say judges are wonderful, judges are great, they know the law, they know how to apply the law. Well, it leads to huge inconsistency interpretations. The BNF any law student or professional among us will be in court offences, which good luck trying to understand those. Herring admitted that there is no hard and fast rule. This is because of the statutory term more than merely preparatory, which judges just don't struggle to interpret at times, and unfortunately I see hate crime going this way. Let us remember the noble pursuits of the first Parliamentary Council, Heaton, who highlighted that due to the evolution of ledge.gov, around 2 to 3 million people go on to the parliamentary maintained network ledge.gov every month. He highlights that there is not just a need for law, but a need for good law. He calls for drafting to be clearer and a better overall design of statute. This only serves to highlight that the obfuscation in the current hate crime legislation makes it not fit for purpose. It's also our duty to defendants. We're not here only to protect the victim. Of course we must protect the victim, but we must also protect the defendant, because a defendant is not always necessarily guilty. The legislation offends a principle of legal fairness. While the intention of such laws is to protect vulnerable groups, it could create a form of legal discrimination, where crimes targeting certain groups are treated more seriously than others. This is a byproduct of the intention, and therefore it's not a byproduct and contrary to the intention, and therefore not fit for use. In the purpose of driving down hate-related incidents, you create a system that prioritises some communities over others. In a world where we've witnessed what Ballymena, Clockfern, Bangor, Ards, Direction have also said, we have this accusation that there's a two-tiered criminal justice system. We've watched it just there this week with Shandon Park, the road signs, where the taking away of part of that road sign was rightly labelled a hate-related incident. However, equally, the constant graffitiing of Londonderry signs were not. The graffitiing of signs, welcome to occupied Ireland, is not labelled hate crime at times. This creates inconsistency. This creates a subjectivity that is not appropriate for criminal law. I do wish to sum up briefly here just. Over 60% of victims of hate crimes don't want the law to come down like a heavy hammer on top of perpetrators. They prefer victim-led restorative justice. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Judge Manigan, who, if you will recall, is an instigator for the push for further hate crime legislation, but also highlighting the inconsistencies in the current legislation. As a tradesman at heart, I must say not every tool is fit for every job. I cannot use a sledgehammer to precisely cut a piece of glass. Instead, I use a glazier knife. This legislation, in pursuit of a noble aim, misses, asking the criminal justice system to bend to its will and asking judges to break glass whilst equipping them with a sledgehammer. And with that, I commend the motion.
Thank you to Lee, who I recall asking me difficult questions in criminal law tutorials last year. So clearly his debating skills were paying off there. We now move to our fourth speaker, a second one for the opposition, and it's Dhivyah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was walking past Fountain Street a few days ago, a walk I've done thousands of times, as I'm sure many of you have. You walk past College Street Cafe, there are Savers on the left, Boots in the distance, you know the works. What was different about my walk this time was that as I walked past a nail salon that I always do, I heard a commotion coming from the inside. I approached the store, and to my absolute horror, what I saw before me was a group of teenagers thrashing the place. Now, it is necessary for the story for me to mention that the owner of this nail salon was an Asian woman, and I saw her standing in a corner, helpless, feebly, her voice shaking as she said she wanted to call the police, and to which one of the brutes looked at her and said, "You're not going to do anything, you Chinese beep." I'm censoring myself so poor Daniel doesn't get a heart attack. Now, I am ashamed to say that I stood there stunned in the midst of all of this. It all happened so fast. The next moment, they were out the door and gone. I just witnessed a hate crime on this random Wednesday on my way to Boots trying to get toothpaste. This is the last thing I expected to see. But of course, I snapped out of my daze and I approached the woman and I asked her if she was okay. She looked at me with a look that I can only describe as tired and defeated as she said that this happens all the time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, sit with me for a moment as we let this sink in about how dehumanized she must have felt on the premises of her own business in her own town. But of course, my purpose here today isn't to tell you that hate crime is bad. Of course, we all know hate crime is bad. But my purpose here is that I want to highlight in this debate that this poor woman didn't go through what she went through because of a failure of legislation, but rather than the system around her failed to bring that law to life. Northern Ireland does have hate crime laws. We do know that the Criminal Justice No. 2 Northern Ireland Order 2004 allows judges to impose enhanced sentences when prejudice is identified as a motivating factor. And this is something Proposition concedes to when they verbatim quote in their own speeches that the problem is then inconsistency in the way the law is then enforced, and that's where the problem lies. The most significant point we get from Prop is that the law can be vague, but when I say that even if we acknowledge that this might be true, a level of vagueness allows for flexibility and depending on
sensitivities and different circumstances, this can prove to be beneficial. And is this something that is fit to say that the entire law as a whole is unfit? We don't think so on side op. We believe that what is the point of advocating constantly for legislation change when no matter what, if the translation of that law into society is broken, nothing ever really changes. At the end of the day, hate crimes are still going to happen because of a lack of reporting from victims, because of fear or distrust that it'll be enforced in a way that will actually bring change, and they therefore feel isolated and powerless, and the fact that there is still prevalent stigmas against minority groups in society. The question now is then, if not reforming legislation, how do we fix this? How do we really make sure that victims like that nail salon owner actually get what they need help with? We believe that first and foremost, there needs to be active initiative taken to rebuild trust between minority communities and the police. Because it's not that hate crime law is unfit, it's that those who need it most don't feel like it's accessible to them. The salon owner didn't call the police, and she is not the only one that would have done that. Many victims fear reporting. They fear language barriers, the cultural differences, or the inaction that may possibly happen, and the sting of neglect that comes with that. The solution is not to change the laws or more laws. It's about fostering trust. We need to create a culture of officers that's more than intimidating enforcers with flashy badges and like holsters at their hips, but actually like sensitive allies of the communities that they've sworn to protect. Sure.
It's not true that while we can also create an environment where officers and constables understand the nuances of such an issue, we can also push for harsher legislation like is currently going through the Assembly, which does punish hate crimes in a way that is more efficient.
Even if we acknowledge that to be true, I think you still need to meet your burden of proof to say why exactly the current legislation is so bad that you are deeming it completely unfit. I think we are saying now that the main issue lies in the way it actually translates to society, the way it's enforced, and that's what we need to focus on fixing. Now, we can go a step further, in fact. We can say that there needs to be regular audits of like hate crime reporting within police systems to ensure accountability within the police force. Because it's the moment that hate crime complaints are not followed up with, that's when you erode public trust, that's when the system is undermined, that's when you've lost the trust of the people that you've sworn to protect. We want the victims to feel like the law is something they can actually grasp and use as a shield, rather than something that's so distant and almost out of reach. Now, after this incident happened, I was talking about it to everyone I knew, and what shocked me was the number of people that of course sympathized and understood that this was something that was tragic that had happened, but they would follow it up with well, you know how teenagers are, or they'll grow out of it. This was something that was deeply shocking to me. It made me deeply reflect on how so many people undermine the seriousness of hate crimes and dismiss it as youth mischief, which is why public awareness campaigns is so important, why community education programs are so important, why events like this that you have all attended tonight are so important, because the law can punish hate, but it's only through improving communities' ideologies, like improving systemic beliefs, which is when we can address the root of the problem and prevent it from happening in the very first place. This looks like introducing school-based anti-prejudice programs, cross-country youth programs, launching media and social campaigns to show the real impact of hate crimes and victims and communities. It means encouraging bystander intervention training so people can know how to safely intervene. So we prevent people like me who stood to the side, because we need to fix this plague that is the bystander effect. And we need to not leave the most vulnerable left feeling even more vulnerable. It looks like community-based support networks for victims, where victims stop feeling isolated and powerless even after reporting. This means that we can fund community response teams or hate crime support hubs where victims can actually access legal advice, counseling, translation programs to help them feel more at home and help them feel like they can actually enact some sort of justice. This looks like actual initiatives being taken to make sure victims know that they aren't alone, that the society they live in is willing to stand up and defend them. As I conclude my speech today, ladies and gentlemen, I think of that woman sweeping the broken glass and spilt nail polish, feeling like her human dignity was stripped from her, feeling like the access to that legislation that was set out to protect her was so out of reach that she didn't even try. Let's not distract ourselves by telling ourselves that we need to fix the laws. Let's all take some accountability upon ourselves, our community, our police force, to do better and to uphold the principle of the law in itself. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
What a powerful story that shaped the narrative there. We now move on to the proposition again and to James.
Good Mahogat, Carlick, August Octoran Daniel, ladies and gentlemen, Akarja. When the United Kingdom first introduced aggravated hate crime laws, it did so under a noble premise that hate would count for more, that prejudice, whether based on race, religion, sexuality, disability, or any other identity category, would not be dismissed as a footnote to crime, but recognised as a poison that corrodes communities. Yet, for all its intent, the current legislation is simply not fit for purpose. The principle is sound, sure, but the practice, the reality on Britain's streets, online spaces, and in its courtrooms falls tragically short. Let's start with the facts. According to the Home Office, there were 137,558 hate crimes recorded in England and Wales in 2024 to 2025, a 2% rise on the previous year. Religious hate crimes reached 7,000 offences, an increase of 3%. These are not just numbers. They are stories of people being harassed, being spat on, attacked, or vilified simply because of who they are. If the system were working, we might expect such figures to fall. Instead, hate crime is climbing, and public faith in the system is falling. The same official statistics reveal that only around 40% of victims said that they were satisfied with how the police handled their case, down sharply from 55% in the year before. So what's going on? The first issue is underreporting. The Crime Survey for England and Wales estimates roughly 176,000 hate incidents occur each year, far more than police figures capture. Many victims stay silent, convinced that nothing will come of reporting, or worse, that they'll be dismissed, doubted, or re-traumatised by the process. For marginalised groups who already feel alienated, this lack of trust is devastating. Second, the law's definitions are narrow, they're rigid, they are outdated. Many acts of hatred simply do not meet the technical thresholds for prosecution. The shouting of slurs in the street, the vile torrent of abuse online, the subtle intimidation that says, "You don't belong here." These incidents cause real harm, yet they often slip through the cracks because they don't fit neatly into a 20th century legal box. Yes, I'll accept.
Mike? Yep. If you just use the mic.
So do you then concede that the issue is with enforcing these laws rather than the legislation itself?
No, because I believe the two things can be true at once. I believe that while we can strengthen laws, there also needs to be better engagement, better education about this issue. While the laws are not perfect, and neither are the other initiatives, two things can be true at once. We can strengthen both. And simply the fact is, legislation is often supplementary to initiatives, and I believe in both to fixing this vile problem. There's also an inconsistency in how hate crime is recorded, prosecuted, or sentenced. And it often depends less on the act itself than whether it's reported and who handles it. One police force might take a robust stance. Another might dismiss it as antisocial behaviour. The result, a postcode lottery for justice. And underpinning it all is a problem of data. We cannot fix what we fail to measure properly. Without consistent, transparent reporting of all hate-motivated incidents, including so-called non-crime hate incidents, policymakers are simply fighting blindfolded. So what needs to change? We must first broaden the scope of protection. Hate doesn't always come with a punch or a smashed window. It comes through words, through exclusion, through the drip feed of online abuse that erodes people's safety and belonging. Our laws should recognise that. Next, we need consistent national training. Every police constable, prosecutor and judge should understand how to identify hate motivation and how to support victims appropriately. Cultural competence is not a luxury, it is a necessity for justice. Indeed, as has been previously mentioned today, the PSNI has seen over 2,300 hate crimes recorded in just the last year. These numbers are both shocking and sad. And while I am glad that this week we are focusing on tackling hate crime and the police service is encouraging people to speak up. We need our legislation to reflect the public's enthusiasm for fighting this poison and protecting our people. We also need independent oversight, a body that ensures hate crimes are recorded and prosecuted consistently across the UK. Indeed, and here in Northern Ireland, we do not have such protections that exist in the mainland, with such current legislation working slowly through the Assembly, and I note the word slowly. The fundamental fact is that equality before the law must not depend on geography. But tougher laws alone won't solve this, and indeed, Dhivyah, we recognise this fact. We need stronger community partnerships, we need greater victim support and more restorative justice. Perpetrators should face real consequences, but also real understanding of the harm that they have done. Restorative justice, when appropriate, can turn offenders into allies, not repeat offenders. We must say with one voice that hate in any form is intolerable, not only in our conscience, but in our law. The UK's hate crime framework was once progressive. Today, it's a shield full of holes. Noble in principle, but inadequate in protection. It needs reform, expansion, and above all, courage. Because legislation is not just a legal instrument, it is a moral declaration of who we are. And if we as a society, if we, everyone here, truly believe in equality and dignity, then our laws must not just punish hate, they must prevent it. Thank you.
Gormayagat, James, we now move to our final speaker for the opposition, and we invite Rosa to the podium.
The prosecution would have you believe that issues within the current system can be blamed on our current legislation, rather than on inefficiencies within the system itself. They have brought up, Beth, how the current legislation can be and is ignored, agreeing with Dhivyah's speech, the issues with enforcement. She brought up a lack of training. She said the legislation was incomplete and full of loopholes, but offered no examples of specific changes which could be made or specific problems. Lee, the supposed vague legislation with vague intent. I would disagree. It is clearly defined, which I believe the first speaker of both the opposition and the proposition went into. Hate is based on your religious, your racial, your sexuality, your identity, and which is all laid out within the law.
Yeah.
Could you use the mic, please, James?
Sorry.
Yep.
If it was such an efficient law, then why would the Justice Minister be proposing new legislation to tackle such an issue?
That is a band-aid, and it is distracting us from the real issues. James outlined statistics, how people were unsatisfied with how the police handled their cases. Again, the system is the issue. He also mentioned how the law is currently narrow and rigid, which contradicts the previous speaker, who said it was vague. Can we please make up our minds? It is so easy to point at problems and issues, statistics and case studies, to identify at the basis level that there is something that needs to change. This behavior, this naysaying, which is akin to your friend who you invite over to watch a movie, and then when she shoots down all your ideas, she does not offer any of her own. This solves nothing, nada, zilch. And it is the belief of myself and my fellow members of the opposition that not only are they being insane Debbie Downers, they have identified the wrong target for their ire. It is not the fault of the legislation that hate crimes are on the rise, that the current internet culture perpetuates and exacerbates the radical, the extremist, the conspiracy theorist, that it is human nature to find someone below us to blame for our own current problems. Would we say our laws against, say, murder aren't fit for purpose because human beings still murder each other? No, we would not. It is a patently absurd take. I don't oppose this motion out of some naivety, some misplaced belief that since these laws were put in place, life is all cupcakes and rainbows. That violent crimes are suddenly no longer racially, religiously, homophobically motivated. The racist riots in Belfast last summer, followed by the brutal attacks on migrant families this June, attest to that fact. These are terrible, horrific acts that demand an immediate solution. Even in my personal life, do I wish that I didn't get called certain slurs, which I will not be repeating here, while waiting in line for Kremlin? That in my previous relationship, we didn't have to avoid public displays of affection, which straight couples got to revel in for fear of getting jumped on the way home? That the members of the Palestine Action group chat of Queens didn't have to ask each other for advice on whether it's even safe for them to wear their cufflias around the campus? Yes, of course. Do I blame the laws banning these acts for the acts themselves? No. And to solve this, the proposition seems to think we should just write new legislation, draft an ever so slightly differently worded law. That'll fix it, yeah. We haven't addressed any of the root causes of this issue or looked into how we can better enforce this legislation, as Dhivyah so clearly outlined. But our new legislation is the answer. I promise this time it will be different, guys. No. No, 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 no. What we need is a targeted, systematic approach addressing the root causes of this hatred. I have spoken to so many girls who feel, whether correctly or not from personal experience or internal biases, that they are more likely to experience sexual offenses and sexual threats from immigrant men of different cultures, which may have different attitudes towards women. If we brush these fears aside, if we neglect to address their fears of potential immigrant vetted oversights, if we neglect to educate them on their own internal biases, which this is rooted in, we risk radicalizing these women. Similar to this, if we neglect to address the belief of so many women, particularly in the UK in the current climate, that there is an inherent danger to them from people assigned men at birth, rather than a failure in the way our society has raised the men who would do harm to women, we will never be able to address the rampant hatred towards trans women in this country. On top of all that, social media is constantly pushing dangerous, radical ideas and views towards especially our young people. People who may feel helpless in their own lives, people who want someone to blame for the current state of the world they see waiting for them. The easiest way to get someone angry is to give them someone to blame. The more angry we are, the more engaged we are, the longer we are spending on their social media apps. If we neglect to address the rampant misinformation and frankly cult-like state of so many internet spaces in the modern day, we are facilitating this hatred. What we need is a targeted, two-pronged approach, one of crime prevention as well as crime control, one that addresses the root of the hatred and enforces our current legislation instead of wasting time and resources on what amounts to pretty words. Current hate crime legislation is perfectly fit for purpose. It criminalizes hate crimes, as has been gone over and over in the previous speeches, to a greater extent than regular crimes, and which, when used correctly, criminals who are motivated by hate get more significant sentence. This is understandably disappointingly, as we would of course all prefer to eradicate the problem entirely, the most we can ask of a law or a piece of legislation. From there, the onus is on our police forces to help enforce this legislation, and on our judges to follow and support this legislation, and on our schools to educate our children on those who are different from them so that we can address the root cause of this issue. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much. That was an excellent response, thinking on your feet when asked the question. Well done. And I think now, if Daniel keeps me right here, but I think it's now over to the audience to field questions. And there may be, Michael will keep us right. Is there roving microphones? Yeah. Oh, there we go. So if you want to raise your hand, Then we'll send Michael over to you. There we go. First question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for a very interesting debate. I would like to pose my question to the young lady who was last on stage. I think you said this, the young man asked a question and you said that he was avoiding the issue. The issue is not the legislative law, the issue is the system. So how would you tackle and change the system?
Well, personally, I believe that we should use information campaigns, education in schools, community outreach where we can get together people of different beliefs, of different religions, of different ethnic and religious backgrounds to show that we are all humans and there's no need to hate each other, as is pushed on the internet in today's world. We need to stop the isolation and the radicalization of the people in our communities so that we can prevent the issue at its root. And also we need better training for our police officers and better information for the common people on what their rights are.
Thank you. And do we have another question? Oh, follow-up question. Yes, go ahead.
I want to follow up on your answer. You've suggested all those changes, however, and you mentioned police officers and institutions who are part of the system that you are trying to change with your new information. So how do you think the system will respond to you trying to change it? Because you are not introducing anything new here. This has been tried for centuries in terms of changing the system. So I'm trying to see what your new ideas are for addressing those systematic changes that are required. Don't you do that. Don't do that. We're underrepresented, so you won't
Of
mind
course.
if I ask a few more questions.
Would anyone on the opposition like to
yeah,
address that?
I'm very happy to answer again now. Well, I'm going to be so real with you. I am a first year. I don't know the world that well, and I have looked into this topic too far past my little research session last night. So I don't have any specific, campaigns and solutions to hand. But I think that there are ways to do it, and I think that the issue is in pushing the resources into that area and a targeted approach.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Proposition response.
Yes, proposition to respond.
So I completely agree with what the question, the point of the question. What was highlighted there that the police and the system and the justice system are not equipped. Well, Joe does equip them concise and effective legislation. The police and the judiciary can only act on the basis of legislation, otherwise they are acting ultra vires. So we need to be giving them better tools. If we want hate crime to come down, we give them better tools.
And we have another question from over here.
I'd just like to hear some people's thoughts. We've been dealing with a recent incident there in and around sort of Donegal Pass, sort of Shaftesbury Square, where there was a group of young people actually hitting people with water balloons. So, to talk about the complexities, is it antisocial behaviour, is it a hate crime? So the kids hit 20 people with water balloons and 4 from an ethnic minority background. Is that a hate crime or is it antisocial behaviour? And I think that sort of young case there highlights the complexities within that from a policing point of view then as well. So just like to hear people's thoughts.
If I could still hear if you're happy, yes. They'll not object anyway. This is one of the points I was trying to address. There's an inherent vagueness within the law that needs addressing. What is the difference between a hate-motivated crime and a victim of a crime who just so happens to be a member of one of the protected categories? This leaves people in a very uncomfortable position when addressing anything. So this is what I mean. We need to be giving people better tools, not only so that people can understand the law, but also so that our systems and the tools of the state effectively are in a better place to address incidents like you're talking about. Because I'm sure PPS are sitting there going, what do we do now? Because as you highlight yourself, there's no intent. We don't know the intent there. Where do we sit? Is it happenstance, or is it a derived and deliberate motive.
Thank you. Would the opposition like to offer any comment?
Just to respond, I don't think legal frameworks of the law is necessarily unfamiliar with when it comes to discussing intent. I think the concept of intent is super ingrained in like so many areas of the law. I think in criminal law, it is literally a necessary aspect that we have to consider when it comes to determining what kind of sentence someone gets. You have to determine the intent. I think police enforcers, I think judges all have the tools necessary to determine the intent that goes behind an action. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that laws are unfit because it's hard to determine intent. Like, yes, it's hard, but that's sort of the point, and that's why it's up to them to interpret it accordingly. But it's definitely within legal frameworks, and the law does dealing with intent constantly in many other areas, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for one, probably last question.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for creative, thought-provoking input and for the time you've given to research your arguments. Dhivyah, my question is for you, please. Thank you for sharing, a very stirring experience of witnessing, what happened with the shop owner. And my question really to you would be, I suppose to anyone on your team, your position, when you argue against the need for changing legislation, what do you foresee as an alternative to serving as a deterrent? Because while we talk about implementation of current existing legislation, and we all know that there are a number of incidents throughout the UK where teenage children are on the rampage in similar, situations like you described to us, Dhivyah. And when they are faced with any consequence of, perhaps calling the police, the response, the rhetoric is, "You can't touch me." And that's obviously because hate crime legislation is broken. So what would be your response in saying, how do we present a deterrent if current legislation isn't being implemented and engaged with effectively enough to lower the incidents that we are seeing?
Thank you so much for the question. So to answer, I think first and foremost, a sort of policy of zero tolerance needs to be adopted. I don't think the problem necessarily lies within legislation itself, because that implies that the law in itself is worded in a way that's flawed or anything like that. It's more the focus of my speech, and I think the focus of my team as a whole, was to address the fact that the way it's enforced is then maybe the issue, or the ideologies within society is then the issue, and that's the root. So I think that's something we want to focus on, because I think the way I understood this debate was that we need to pinpoint where exactly we want to direct our focus. Is it that we want to reform legislation, or do we want to improve on the grassroots level community building things and improving sensitivities within the police force? When it comes to the whole ideology of how a lot of teenagers feel like there's just no consequences for them and that nothing can touch them, I think that's where the reformations that I propose in my speech kind of comes to fruition, about how you need more in-school programs to really harp the zero tolerance policy, really engage with how, address children and tell them that it's okay if someone looks different from you or acts different from you. They're still human. There's still no need to hate them. It starts from young. I think that's where it needs to begin. And that's how we can kind of foster change rather than shifting our attention to blaming laws specifically. Does that answer your question?
Yes or no?
Okay.
Could they not coexist? Could it not be? So, yes or no? It does answer my question, and then it doesn't equally. Could they not coexist? Could the two not coexist? The need for an improvement on current legislation, as well as education programs that help implement the legislation on a wider scale and community basis, grassroots level. Could they not coexist?
I'm willing to concede that it can coexist. It's just for specifically the context of today's debate. It's more so, what do we want to focus on more? I think in a broader societal sense, sure, it can. But specifically in a debate context, if we have to hyper-focus on one or the other, then the question is, where do we want to shift our attention to?
Thank you, Dhivyah. Would the proposition like to respond?
Yes, the best deterrent is jail time, unfortunately. we wouldn't be paying our boys in blue, but was it dark green now? I think. Yeah, bottle green. Yeah, dark green. The opposition summarised legislation as pretty words. Well, those pretty words put people in prison. So, as you completely point out, they can coexist. We can stand here and say that society is failing minorities. We can stand here and say we need to be intervening in community groups, education, housing. We can be doing so much, but equally, we can stand here and say that the current legislation is not fit for use. For whenever those efforts do fail, people are still falling through the cracks. There's creating of ambiguity in law. Two things can coexist.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of our speakers up on stage for what has been an excellent debate, and I think they all deserve a lot of credit for that. Yeah, what's particularly powerful is the things that we all saw from that debate that we had in common, not only that we're united against hate crime, but you'll notice that all the speakers drew on examples that are true to us all in this room, because I'm sure either yourself or someone you know, whether it's your colleague, whether it's your neighbour, whether it's someone in your family or your friend, has suffered from a hate crime incident before, and that's why it's also important that we have people who are able to voice that, who are able to stand up for it, and then we can come together to find a solution, in this fight, to address it and to really tackle it. So I think that that's very important what our speakers have done today, and I'd like to invite Professor Kevin Brown to offer closing remarks before our final vote. Thank you.
Thank you, and I've been so impressed with all six of you. Sorry, I'm in the way. It was what I was really particularly impressed with is that you articulated both the argument for why we need the criminal law in this area reformed, why we need new hate crime legislation for those who were the proponents, but the opponents, I thought, illuminated the other key point, and that key point is it's not just law alone that will solve things, that as lawyers we can maybe, our instinct is we'll reform the law and everything will be okay, and that's clearly not the case, and that was teased out very well too. So I'd just like to say a huge admiration to all six speakers, and can I give them another round of applause? And I think I now hand back to Daniel again.
And now comes our final part of the first debate. So this is the vote on speaker ability. So it's important to keep in mind that this is not which side you personally agree with more. We are voting on how the speakers presented themselves at the podium. We're also voting on how the rhetoric which was used, the examples that were used, the use of imagery and metaphor, the argument itself, which have been put under a good amount of scrutiny from both sides, the teamwork that was shown throughout both sides of the debate, and then finally the engagement from yourselves as an audience pitching questions, but also from the POIs that were offered throughout the debate. So can I have all those who would like to vote for the proposition on speaker ability, please raise their hands now. Okay, that's 15. And can I have... Plus 3, yes, very well reminded. I did count, yep. So that is 18. Thank you, James. And can I have all those who would like to vote for the opposition on speaker ability, please raise their hands now. Okay, so that is 40 for the opposition. And then finally, can I have all those who would like to abstain on the motion of speaker ability, please raise their hand. I believe that's 3. So finally, the results of the vote on speaker ability, the opposition take it 40 to 18 on the vote of speaker ability. Congratulations. Thank you. And I'd like to invite Mandy back up on the stage to reveal our next segment on the agenda. Thank you.
I'll not make you do another round of applause, but I absolutely thought the standard of debate there was absolutely brilliant. I was going to say many years ago, but it might be generations ago. I was heavily involved in the Queen's Debating Society, and it brings back a lot of memories, and the standard of debate there was just brilliant. In fact, I was a bit mischievous there, and I've just put out a tweet where I tagged the Northern Ireland Assembly and said I'm actually sitting at a debate with a group of young people who I think, in terms of might give you a run for your money. So I'm sure they'll be on to me later going, what were you doing that for? But absolutely brilliant. You have to take every opportunity you can get. So it's time to get serious again. And our second motion of the day takes us from the law to lived experience. And the motion is, this House believes communities address hate crime better than the criminal justice system. This debate will again be managed by the brilliant Literific, but this time I'll be chairing the discussion, for better or worse, with them, and keeping our speakers on time, on topic, or at least trying to. So, will we get stuck in?
Yes, you all know the rules by now, but just to give a brief overview again, we have 7-minute speeches from each of our speakers. You'll notice that we have a new selection of 6 speakers who are part of our community here at the Literific. So community is obviously very important, and we'll be discussing it in the context of hate crime too. And again, you'll hear from the various different speakers, they'll be listening to each other, they'll be engaging with each other, and they'll be drawing on their own personal experiences, but also the experiences of others to show how we can grow together as a society and how we can address this very prevalent issue. So as I said, 7-minute speeches, POIs within the panel, and then at the end, we will open it up to the floor again so that you can ask questions on speakers if you would like to hear a bit more of an expansion on certain arguments that were mentioned, or address something that you feel wasn't covered in the debate. So the debate, and to remind you again of the motion, is this House believes communities address hate crime better than the criminal justice system. So can I have all those for the vote of prior opinion who believe in the motion to vote for the proposition now, please? So if you believe that hate crime is better addressed by communities than the criminal justice system. Okay, that is 15. And then can I have all those who wish to vote for the opposition please raise their hands now? Okay, that is 12 votes for the opposition. And finally, all those who would like to abstain from the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, so with 10 abstentions, 15 votes for the proposition and 12 votes for the opposition, the proposition carry the motion. And I would like to invite our guest chair, Mandy McAuley, BBC journalist, to open the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just so excited they've actually let me out of the office. Can you tell I'm enjoying myself? So I'd like to introduce, first of all, the speakers for the proposition: Bakaer Noble, Nihal Bhatt, Luke Coyle, and for the opposition, Maeve Gee, Mikayla Williams, and Rea Thien. And first open for the proposition, a round of applause for Bakaer Noble.
If your car breaks down, the police and by extension the criminal justice system, they would arrive 3 hours late, take a photo of the tyre and tell you that an investigation is underway. Your community though, somebody nearby has a jack, someone has a spare tyre, and within 10 minutes you're back on the road. That's exactly why communities deal with hate crime better. They don't just respond, they repair. The key word here in this debate is address. And on the proposition, we know that the criminal justice system is incapable of addressing the problem. It isn't necessarily the fault of the system, just the way that it was set up. It's set up in such a way as to only address the problems after they've occurred. The criminal justice system only steps in when a crime has been committed, when there's a criminal and a victim. They do fund some preventative measures, and there's loads of good resources available within the system. But this doesn't necessarily address the problem. The problem can only be truly solved at grassroots levels, within communities themselves. To actually explain, it's probably better that we address what the word address actually means. On the proposition, we believe address to refer to preventing, responding to, and reducing the impact of hate crime, not just punishing it. Unfortunately, the criminal justice system is only good at one of these. We have to realise that this debate isn't just about legality, but also about effectiveness. If anybody's best positioned to make positive change within a community, surely it's the community itself. Just the other night, I went to the Anglican chaplaincy, the Hub, at Queen's, to listen to a speech delivered by our very own, I don't think he's here, but our very own Matthew Spratt. And I'm not a particularly devout Anglican, and if the speech was delivered by someone from the outside, I probably wouldn't have gone. But it wasn't. It was delivered by my friend, it was delivered by a member of the Literific, and therefore I actively wanted to go. Not just to support him, but to hear the message which he so clearly cares about. And this is the same for the crux of this debate. When a community comes together to tackle a problem, the people within the community are much more likely to get involved because it's organised and run by their own people. Let's take, no thank you. Let's take an example. In Northern Ireland, during the rise of hate crimes against migrant workers in small towns, it wasn't the courts or the police who stopped the abuse. It was the local residents who organised cross-community events, set up neighbourhood watch groups, and paired migrant families with local volunteers. Hate incidents fell dramatically, not because anyone was punished, but because people started to know one another. No, thank you, again. That is what addressing the hate crime really looks like. In the United States, similar community-led approaches like safe zones and restorative justice circles have reduced the reoffending rates for hate-related crimes by up to 40%. When offenders face the people they've harmed and hear the impact of their actions, it changes their behaviour. The criminal justice system, by contrast, simply locks them up and hopes that the problem goes away. The role of communities in addressing hate crime is not just in education and support, but also in rehabilitation. While the criminal justice system simply aims to punish offenders, communities are the ones responsible for reintegration. After all, they are the ones who'll have to accept them into their communities once they're released. And I'm sure that the opposition will argue that the criminal justice system does rehabilitate, and it's true to some degree in the UK, although it's still less effective than community rehabilitation and acceptance. The motion also does not specifically mention countries, and we know that for a fact every country is not like the UK. In many countries, no rehabilitation is offered, and the offender simply becomes an outcast in society, ostracised from society. Overall, we would say that it's better to be integrated into society, and that the way to address the problem is education and understanding, rather than simple crime and punishment. If we want genuine change, those individuals must be guided back into society through understanding, not exclusion. Communities are uniquely placed to do that. They can set boundaries and offer redemption, whereas the state just often brands people for life. The opposition will also likely say that communities cannot enforce the law, that they lack power or authority. But that misses the point. We're not saying that communities should replace the law. We're saying that they address hate crime better. It's all about whether they address it better than the criminal justice system. They prevent, heal, and change behaviour more effectively. And they... No, thank you. And they might also say that the justice system ensures equality, but in practice, the system is riddled with bias. Equal protection under the law is meaningless as victims don't trust the police enough to use it. And finally, they might argue that communities can be biased in themselves, and that's true, but the difference is that communities can reform from within, through dialogue and representation, while state systems move slowly and resist accountability. Mr. President, Madam Guest Speaker, the criminal justice system punishes hate crime, but it does not fix it. It reacts after the damage is done, leaving victims isolated and communities divided. Communities, on the other hand, they prevent hate, support victims, and rebuild trust. Go ahead. Could you use the mic, please, Rea?
Wouldn't you say that communities need funding in order to address hate crime?
Well,
and where would they get that funding?
Well, they can get the funding from the government. They can get it from charitable organisations. The criminal justice system is the other body in this debate, and they need funding as well. Communities use the funding that they get to address the problem better than the criminal justice system. Communities, on the other hand, prevent hate, support victims, and rebuild trust. They create safety not through fear of punishment, but through understanding, respect, and belonging. And that's why, for the sake of justice, compassion, and real social change, I urge you to vote for the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Baker. Some very strong arguments there. And that central proposition, can communities reform better from within? Well, there's a question. So we're going now to the opposition and to Maeve Gee.
Sympathy or justice? That's what this debate truly is about. Proposition will argue that communities who decide to respond to hate crime in whatever way they deem most appropriate is better, more fair. This is just sympathy tied up with a false facade of justice. Yet this isn't justice, it's a reaction, a response. It's nature at its finest. Someone or something commits an action or hurts you or your team, your community. You want to defend and respond, often in unpredictable and unsafe ways. Someone says something negative about your favourite football team or band. Would you really let that slide? Chances are you would argue with them on it or even fight them. It's in our nature. Fairness is what humans are trying to achieve by addressing hate crime themselves. However, especially for those involved, what is considered fair or equal might not be, due to it being blown out of proportion by those involved. Obviously, while hate crimes are fundamentally awful, there's no arguing about that. If you're on the receiving end, oftentimes vengeance and payback is what is wanted. And yes, justice, but all three simultaneously is, even while being perceived to be occurring, is not real, and it's not a long-term solution. When a community is directly involved in this issue, they feel the need to respond and make those who committed the hate crime feel the same way. oftentimes by committing their own hate crimes in return, very rarely peacefully, like what Bakaer was talking about. How ethical? After this retaliation, can you guess what happens? Yeah, that community then responds, and then the original community responds, and it goes on and on and on, often escalating in severity as time goes on. It's fighting fire with fire. Obviously, this isn't a good idea, especially when the actions being committed are illegal, but it just further adds kindling to the fire and reinforces whatever beliefs the opposing communities have of each other, and it does just create more work for the inevitable response of the criminal justice system in the end. Is Proposition really trying to convince us that they believe that an explosive, impulsive, unorganised response to hate crimes is the best response rather than the calm, cautious, organised response of the criminal justice system? Yes, we'll admit the criminal justice system isn't perfect. It can take a while to receive this justice, sometimes taking years. And yes, we'll hold up our hands and admit it does occasionally fail communities. But when this happens, the system is held accountable. The justice I mentioned is fair. It looks at this situation rationally, without bias. It takes into account a variety of different background issues which might have not even been thought about by the responsive communities. This doesn't even mention the fact that instead of stoking the fire, escalating the situation and making it worse, it can end the situation once and for all. Whether this be by putting one of the leaders into prison or by just giving an example of it, by creating initiatives as well, which can bring around peace and change by changing these hateful mindsets. Or would you rather the smouldering fire, flickering in the corner for years, occasionally being stoked by one issue or another, but never being put out and resolved? That's what Proposition wants. Disparity is present everywhere. Look at today's debate, where the gender disparity on this issue could definitely be spoken about. Yeah, this is often overlooked, as the same communities in different areas believe they're all in the same situation. While the hate crimes being committed might be the same, the other environmental factors most definitely will not be, which can cause major issues. What I'm illustrating here is similar communities in different areas will hold different power. Due to the current social media availability, hate crimes against certain communities now affect all of the similar communities, or it can be mass organised to target multiple areas at once, across countries, where these affected communities then all decide how they want to retaliate. But not all these communities, even if they are the same or similar roots, will be in the exact same position. If a certain community is the majority in one area and respond to a hate crime in a specific way, yes, that might be effective and work, at least in the short term. But if a similar community is a minority in another area and they try and copy this, whatever action is taken, especially those in the areas where those who committed the original offence are in the majority, it could horrendously backfire. It could lead to fatalities. And just due to the difference in the situations, this could and would make the entire situation majorly worse, further escalating the situation, potentially making it nationwide, and it adds to the fire. Furthermore, a hate crime will be addressed the same way in any criminal justice system in a country, whether it be Belfast, Bristol, Leeds, London. Could you say the same about a community's response or ability to respond? No. This would change depending on the location. How is that better? Yeah.
So
Could you use the mic, please?
Oh, sorry. So there was a Pride event in Ballymena where a young man spread slurry over the road of the route the Pride event was taking. He was released. There was no uniformity and there was certainly no punishment given out to him. It showed a bias in the justice system that I think you're ignoring.
We've already admitted the criminal justice system isn't completely accurate right now, and it is something that is having to be worked upon. But while the criminal justice system is trying to change, they then have to deal with the explosive responses of communities as well as trying to manage what actually happens. Lastly, I want to briefly talk about mob mentality and how Proposition is arguing that mob mentality is better at responding to hate crimes. Yet these types of responses to hate crimes committed can get out of hand so quickly, especially because of this mob mentality. It goes back to human nature. Everyone feeds off each other's anger, and before you know it, no one is aware of their actions because everyone is encouraging everyone else. The city is ablaze. It's happened at so many different events. I'm sure you can all think of multiple different places and things that have happened. The majority of cases where communities have tried to respond to these hate crimes, mob mentality takes over, sometimes turning these peaceful responses violent. It doesn't happen in the criminal justice system. It's rational, it's thought through, it's not impulsive. Furthermore, the jurors can't be influenced by outside information. Many go onto a media ban. Overall, in what world is chaotic, dangerous, impulsive reactions from angry, hurt communities a better response than the calm, logical response of the criminal justice system, who are the people that can actually bring around justice to these harmed individuals, not short-lived vengeance? Now I ask you, which is more fair to the victims? Better, if you will. A hate-filled, quick, angry response, which in reality gets us nowhere, or actual justice for the wrongdoing, which can only be brought around by the criminal justice system? Thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. You almost got a spontaneous round of applause in the middle of that for your gender observations. We'll say no more. And the next speaker is Nihal Bhatt. Thank you.
Close your eyes and picture this. It's a quiet Saturday night, laughter hums through the streets, someone's playing music, and someone's walking down the streets. The world feels calm, ordinary, like every other Saturday night. And then the scream of a fire alarm. Windows shatter, smoke claws at the sky. A child is crying inside a burning house. Neighbors rush out, some in pajamas, some barefoot, their faces lit by the orange glow of a car engulfed in flames. There are no police sirens yet, no lawyers, no journalists, no headlines. Just panic, just chaos. And in that chaos, one man steps forward. Someone presses a gun into his hands. The crowd, trembling with fury, starts shouting, "Vengeance, justice, fire for fire." But the man raises his voice, calm, steady, unshaken. "If you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, do not seek them." And suddenly, the crowd falls silent. That man was Martin Luther King. And in that single breath, before the police arrived, before the courts convened, before the history books were written, before any action was taken, justice was born, not from punishment, but from people, from the communities. Because hate crimes are not fought in courtrooms. They are fought in the hearts of communities. And that is why this House believes communities address hate crimes better than the criminal justice system ever can. The criminal justice system is a fire alarm that rings only after the house has burned down. It reacts, but it does not redeem. Hate crimes in England and Wales have quadrupled over the past decade, even as penalties have stiffened. So, if punishment worked, hate would have vanished by now. But the opposition fails to understand that hate cannot be handcuffed. You cannot fine it 500 quid. A courtroom silences hate for a day. A community can silence it for a generation. Because punishment ends in silence, but only education ends the attitude. We on the proposition stand for healing over punishment, understanding over paperwork, and prevention over prosecution. Because the criminal justice system, with its cold walls and a colder language, does not see hurt. It only sees crime. But communities see both. They see the trembling hands of a victim, the silent shame of a survivor, and the ripple of fear that spreads across every street, every school. Hate is not born in courts, and it cannot end there. Hate is born in homes, playgrounds, workplaces, and communities, and it is there where it must be fought. We need schools to teach empathy, local leaders who build unity, and platforms that encourage dialogue, not judges who deliver delayed verdicts. Restorative justice programs where perpetrators meet their victims, understand their harm, and work toward rebuilding have shown real results in reducing hate recidivism. The criminal justice system draws a line. You are guilty, you are not. Communities bridge the gap. You are wrong, but you can change. A hate crime gets reported. The police file statements. Lawyers argue. Months pass. The victim relives the trauma. And in the end, a statistic gets added to the database. But the fear, the stigma, the divide, all of it stays. According to the UK Home Office in 2023, hate crimes have increased by a staggering 24% in just 1 year, even though sentencing for offenders have become tougher. So if harsher laws were the answer, hate would have vanished by now. But remember this, when one person does something wrong, it doesn't define the entire community. Yet somehow we have forgotten that. One man makes a mistake and suddenly a million are branded guilty. Instead of holding the culprit accountable, we start hunting everyone who looks like him, prays like him, or speaks like him. And how do we justify that? We say, the opposition says, use the criminal justice system, right? Use it there. Report the offender, seek justice through the law, and that's how it should be. But instead, we take to our screens, we record, we mock, we troll. We make villains out of innocent people. We humiliate the good ones, shatter their confidence, and teach them to hate themselves for crimes they have never committed. Tell me, what kind of justice is that? That is exactly what communities try to address. And it is a shame that opposition fails to understand that. Communities make the understanding firm that that hate is not the option. Communities address the problems from the inside and not superficially like the criminal justice system. 9 out of 10 crimes in the UK never reach a courtroom, not because victims don't care, but because they don't trust the system that cares for them. But they do trust their neighbors, their teachers, their friends, the people around them, and this very community, which counts them not as a case number, but as a soul. No, thank you. And that's where communities so wonderful, like the Victim Support for Northern Ireland, take over. And they have been doing this since 1981. So, to my friends on the opposition and others, if they still believe that criminal justice system handles hate better, then I wish you good luck waiting for your judges and court appointments while we'll be outside having already fixed the problems, done repainting the walls, rebuilding the trust, and inviting everyone for dinner, reminding the world that the cure for hate was never punishment. It was you, it was the people around you, and it was this very community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nihal. And I must say that the standard of storytelling in these debates today, there has to be some future journalists in this room as well as leaders. But anyway, so I'd like to introduce now for the opposition, Mikayla Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of my flatmates is from Ballymena, and one night she casually dropped that her hometown was up in riots. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard about the Ballymena riots, but long story short, there were these 2 Romanian boys who allegedly assaulted a young local girl. Parts of the community, in an attempt to address the situation, disrupted the town into riots of hatred toward Romanians, and that sentiment was spread towards all foreigners in the area. While the catalytic assault was not a hate crime, the reason I use this example is to help paint a picture of what happens when a community takes justice into its own hands. My point being, the moral compass of a community cannot always be trusted. However, community vigilantism is not the only way in which a community might address hate crimes. Other ways include neighborhood groups, non-government organizations, cultural organizations, etc. But while peaceful community responses have value, they do not address hate crime better than the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system is able to provide formal accountability, legal consistency, and deterrence in a way that the community just isn't capable of. To go a little deeper into this point, the thing that makes the criminal justice system different from the community is that it is bound by law. This means that there is due process, evidence standards, the right to a fair trial, consistent sentencing. These are safeguards that are put in place to prevent any bias. It adds a level of fairness that the community doesn't have. There's nothing holding the community accountable for any mishaps in their handling of a hate crime. We could talk about how, in the past decade, the number of reported hate crimes in Northern Ireland that are actually being addressed is really low. But these low figures still reflect a system that tracks evidence, operates under law, and can be held accountable. In contrast, the community responses have no obligation to be fact-based, fair, or proportionate. For my next point, I want to expand on the idea that community responses to hate crimes can often be unethical and actually escalate harm. The thing is, communities are not impartial. As we heard from Maeve, when trying to address these hate crimes without legal process, they often act out of fear and anger. There is such a high level of misunderstanding and a lack of empathy that goes into this and can actually lead to hate crimes on both sides. When people feel attacked, they try to justify attacking, an eye for an eye, right? But this is so unethical and can even lead to collateral damage as well. Let me share some examples of how community vigilante justice actually has worse outcomes. First, the New Orleans lynching in 1891, when a group of Italian immigrants were acquitted after being accused of murdering the police chief. A mob of local citizens, upset with the verdict, lynched 11 Italian immigrants. No one was held accountable. Second, anti-Muslim mob violence in India in 2020, where Hindu nationalist mobs targeted Muslim neighborhoods in Delhi. Dozens were killed and hundreds were injured. And lastly, as you already know, the Ballymena riots were hate crimes justified as community vigilantism towards immigrants in Northern Ireland. What this shows is that if we claim that communities address hate crimes better than the criminal justice system, then we open the door for harmful things such as ethnic scapegoating. Sometimes community justice is driven by prejudice and can actually escalate hate rather than reduce it. The thing that the proposition is leaving out is that the hate crimes that the community is fighting against are committed by the community. Without due process, communities are vulnerable to mob rule, misinformation, and bias, which makes justice impossible as the law becomes irrelevant. Some might argue that there are non-government organizations that actually address hate crimes better by providing support to victims, regardless of whether a crime has been reported or not. And it may be true that they provide support better, but it is a little bit of a stretch to claim that they address hate crimes better as a whole, as there is so much more that goes into such a thing beyond support. Emotional support is so important, but anything other than the criminal justice system simply lacks the ability to enforce power, punish perpetrators, or deter hate crimes in the first place. While these organizations are so important to fill the gap of helping victims, since this is something that the criminal justice system lacks in, they are not a replacement, rather a complement. While the community can be incredibly effective, it just isn't enough to address hate crimes on its own. Now, if the criminal justice system is so great, then why are the hate crimes rising in Northern Ireland? This is a really, really great question, and it brings up an excellent point. But it's important to remember a couple of things. First, a higher number of reports could actually be a reflection of a greater awareness and confidence of victims to come forward. Second, that hate crimes are complex and oftentimes situational. For example, the rise of immigrants that have been entering Northern Ireland lately might cause an influx of local tensions and prejudices, leading to a higher number of hate crimes. And third, just because the rates are so high does not necessarily indicate that the community is doing better than the criminal justice system, as these organizations are likely just as overwhelmed as the criminal justice system. In conclusion, the Ballymena riots show what happens when communities take justice into their own hands. What began as outrage ended in hate-fueled violence, not justice. I've shown today the criminal justice system provides, not only does the criminal justice system provide due process, consistent, and accountability, it's not perfect, but it's structured to protect against bias and escalation. By contrast, community responses can actually worsen harm, as we've seen in Ballymena, New Orleans, and Delhi. When emotions replace law, hate crimes multiply, not disappear. And while non-government organizations offer vital support, they can't investigate or punish offenders. They complement the justice system, they don't replace it. So yes, communities have a role, but only the justice system can deliver real justice and real protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikayla. There's so much food for thought there in terms of communities and how they respond. So the final speaker for the proposition, Luke Coyle.
Mr. President, esteemed co-chair, today the proposition put forth a motion as integral to recognise as oxygen is to our very lives. From the dawn of time, throughout the time of the Oregon Trail and to present day, we have relied upon our communities for so much. From murder trials to fraud trials to aid in times of need, we have relied upon our fellow man. So why must we refuse to rely upon them now? I am sure that we all agree ladies and gentlemen, that our communities, that the community of Belfast, the community of my experience of Derry, is integral to our day-to-day lives. So why must we not trust them with an issue that affects not only the individual? Hate crimes are not simply an isolated event for one person. They are a matter of public and communal concern. So why must we not address them as such? Firstly, I'd like to discuss the slovenly response of the criminal justice system in dealing with hate crime. As it stands, our justice system is bloated, a rotting corpse, our prisons and courts too choked by needless proceedings to act as an effective check against hate crimes. This is not a stumbling block upon which our communities fall. Acting as a cohesive unit, our communities create a vast, diverse panel of judgment, allowing for collective ownership of punishment when we dole it out and swift responses when needed. I should also point out that a communal approach to addressing hate crimes allows for a wide range of minorities to have their say upon what a hate crime is and how we must respond to them. Who here truly trusts some white-haired old judge to defend the interests of a minority group that they, well, in their time have seen decriminalised, recriminalised? I mean, my experience as a gay man, I don't know if I would exactly trust a man who was a voter of Thatcher or a judge who quite liked her policies to protect my rights. But I would trust people in my community. I would trust the people in this room. So why shouldn't I try to outsource it to you? Why shouldn't I rely on you to help me with my problems? Why shouldn't we address it together? I'd also like to further expound upon a point raised by my good friend Bakaer. Communities are superior in addressing hate crime because, unlike the criminal justice system, communities are equipped not just to fulfil the punitive aspect of hate crime, but also the preventative role. For decades, the complaint has been raised that the criminal justice system does little to prevent crimes, that it does not unload the gun, it merely punishes those who fire it. But this affliction is not one which affects our communities. They are not chained by reactivity. They can proactively take steps to educate on the nature of hate crimes, distributing leaflets and lectures and facts among the population, allowing for the free flow of honest information that is the anathema to hate crimes. My friends, education is indeed the death of hatred, and it is an unfortunate reality that our criminal justice system cannot educate. It can only punish. Another thing I'd like to mention is how circular the opposition is in its challenge to our motion. They tell us that we have to give the justice system a little more time. We've been giving it time since the 60s. That we just need to wait. Justice is around the corner. The ideal, the utopia is just beyond our sight. Do you know what it reminds me of, ladies and gentlemen? Throughout the summer, I would constantly say, oh, I'll go to the gym tomorrow. The diet starts, it's nigh. But my ever-expanding waistline and the facts of the matter in this case would tell you something different. My friends, it is not right nor true to peddle this lie that we just need to give our institutions more time, because what we notice is that when we give institutions more time, they do not progress, they stagnate. Yes?
Do you not believe that the...
Sorry, Mike, please.
Do you not believe that the criminal justice system has progressed over the last 60 years, and many legislations have been passed in the past 60 years that have completed progression? It just does take a little bit more time than hate-filled communities' response.
Well, what I'd love to, grasp there is it just takes a little bit more time. Yes, the law has progressed slightly, but in that time, our communities have progressed eons. Why should we chain ourselves to the law when our communities, and by the way, I'd love to delve into your notion of these hate-filled communities. Ladies and gentlemen, our communities, unlike the opposition is trying to tell you, aren't just these mindless mobs. We on here aren't mindless, are we? Yet we could probably take time to decide upon a course of action together and logically. The opposition are telling you now that you're not right to dole out the punishment, that you cannot provide sentencing, even though it is your community which these things are being done onto. Yes?
Yeah, that's not what we're arguing at all. We're saying that it needs to work in tandem, and only one... Well... I'm not done. Only one institution can actually dole out punishment and dole out, what's the word? Justice.
Well, let's be very clear here. Your first two speakers did actually use those words of mob rule, so I'm not going off the reservation here when I say that you're trying to peddle our communities as though they are these mindless mobs, because factually, your two first speakers did say that. Let's also talk about this idea of doling out punishment. You know, who here actually would say, turn around and say, in Northern Ireland of all places, that our courts dole out justice and dole out punishment 100% of the time? Absolutely right. The fact of the matter is, it's not the case. My friends, we'll also now discuss the great advantages of communal justice and what it provides for the victim. My colleague Mr. Noble raised an excellent point, that the justice system is riddled with flaws that dehumanise the victims of hate crimes. Let's go back to the Pride event in Ballymena. Tell me, for those who have had their day spoiled, for those who had such a heinous act committed onto them, how is it just to watch that man storm out of the gates of a prison just 20 hours later? How is that right? Is that a justice system that works? Is that a justice system that I want to wait on? Is that a justice system that any of you want to wait on? In conclusion, friends, we in the proposition present to you a simple fact. Communities are better positioned to prevent hate crime, better equipped to punish it when it arises, and ultimately more legitimate as a guiding moral force than the alien body of criminal justice, so desperate to impose its will upon us. Ladies and gentlemen, we simply must pass this motion. For in passing the motion, we recognise its veracity and we can begin to fully explore the idea of communal justice. And together we can fully realise the idea, the dream, of an honest, swift and just society. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. I think I might just have been looking at a future politician. And the last speaker for the opposition, Rea Thien.
Born too short. My President Biden to my Kamala, esteemed co-chair. I'm the vice president, by the way, that's why. But anyways, let me begin off topic a bit. I was watching the Addams Family TV series last night while writing this out, and I kind of got to thinking about the motion at hand and the parallels with the famous family. We'd all like to live in a world, I hope, where no one is criticized or ostracized or subject to degrading treatment for their thoughts, demeanor, language, personal identity, and in the case of Cousin It and Lurch, physical differences. However, while the Addams differences may not result in hate crimes directed against them in their world, the exact opposite is certainly the case in ours. Both Maeve and Mikayla have already touched on communities and community organizations, and they often don't address the problem in the long term and only think of the short, as well as touching on the problem of lack of restrictions on communities and community organizations, which can lead to unethical and dangerous behavior. I will continue these arguments with facts and figures, specifically focusing on Northern Ireland, which I found last night while trawling through the Charity Commission website. That was really fun and enjoyable. I've made the firm decision that I'll never become an accountant. As I said, I'll continue the previous opposition arguments and add a bit specifically. First, communities and their organizations are inconsistent and inefficient in how they operate, which I will dive into, while the justice system runs on constancy and stakes its reputation on it. Secondly, the justice system actually enables the communities and the organizations to provide help to the victims of hate crimes and gives those organizations legitimacy. To have one without the other is not the whole picture of how hate crime proceedings are handled, in contrast to what the second proposition speaker said. Now, I have my own experience with community organizations, receiving therapy services from one of the biggest in Northern Ireland. But while this provided me with a short-term solution, only 10 sessions, it did not come close to really diving into the root of my issue. Why? Well, the therapist I was assigned to in this organization... The therapist I was assigned to griped about this every time we met. She talked about how years ago this organization would provide those who availed of its therapeutic services an unlimited amount of sessions, and then it got shortened to 24, and then to 18, and then to 12, and then to 10. And by the time my sessions were completed, she said they were talking about shortening it to 6 sessions. And of course, I asked why. The service, that I believe is essential, keeps being cut every couple years. And she responded, "Why, Ray, I wish we were able to have more sessions, because you definitely need them." But unfortunately, we don't have the funding. The funding is the huge issue when it comes to community organizations. I know because it says so plainly in black and white in the trustees' annual report, which I again spent all last night and early this morning trawling through, finally putting my law classes to good use. I pull this quote from the Victim Support NI Trustees' annual report from 2024. The funding environment continues to be a challenge to the organization, allied with the rising cost of living crisis, and has remained a key organizational risk throughout the year. As costs continue to elevate, this will become more challenging. Forgive me for using our collaborating organization as an example, but it helps my case. And I only have one more statistic that pertains to them. Not only was this concern about funding and financials present in the trustees' report, but for the year of 2024, there was a deficit in funds of around £100,000 for Victim Support NI between its income and expenditures. This is also taken from both the trustees' report and the Charity Commission. Another large community organization that deals with hate crime against the LGBTQ+ community is the Rainbow Project. This organization is also in deficit of around £50,000 between their income and their expenditures, again taken from the same source. Another issue with community organizations is the size. Excluding victim support, which is by and far the largest by millions of pounds and over 100 volunteers, more specified organizations like the Rainbow Project and Migrant Centre and I only have a fraction of the amount of volunteers and employees in proportion to the demographic that they are meant to advocate for. Specifically when it comes to race-related hate crimes, which have increased this year according to the PSNI, the Migrant Centre NI only has 12 employees and 2 volunteers, as taken from the Charity Commission. This is very obviously not enough to deal with the rise in level of hate crimes with a race motivation, which is at more than 1,300 in March. It is certain that this number has raised since March. Can you imagine getting 14 people in total to help those now over 1,300 victims? That's almost impossible. Almost sounds like Luke is trying to make the Justice Department sound like, ooh. Sorry. It's funny that the police are laughing. Sorry. Now going into my second point that I previously mentioned at the beginning, the justice system enables the community and their organizations to provide help to victims and therefore supplies them with legitimacy. You cannot have one without the other. It's as simple as that. It's impossible. I'll start off very easy and very on the nose at first before I get into the nitty-gritty. One of the first things you see when you go onto the Hate Crime Advocacy Service website is the logo of both the PSNI and the Department of Justice. Why, it's the same when you go onto the Migrant Centre NI website as well. There are a couple of reasons for this. Funding and grants is given to these organizations by the PSNI and, oh God, I'm behind, is given to these organizations by the PSNI and the Department of Justice. Those departments gave the Migrant Centre NI over £125,000 in the 23-24 year, providing over half of the community's charities budget for that year. Again, this pulled from the Charity Commission. But now to the crux of this line of argument, the Victim Charter. As you all know, the Victim Charter lays out the entitlements and services that victims of crime in Northern Ireland can expect to receive. This is only enshrined in law due to the Justice Act, Northern Ireland 2015. The type of support that these community organizations are able to give only comes due to the legal standing of it provided by the justice and legislative system. Even in the Justice Act, it refers to these organizations as a criminal justice agency, specifically a body or a person which has any functions relating to victims or any other aspect of the criminal justice system is determined as a criminal justice agency. They are entrenched together and forever will be, but only one side can hand down a judgment. Only one establishment can institute a punishment. While the others can support the victim, it cannot do any more than that. For this reason, vote with opposition.
Thank you so much, Ray, with your comedic timing and asides. I actually think next year you could be giving Matthew Griffith a run for his money. So what about the audience? Just wanted to open it up. That was a fantastic debate. The standard of that debate was incredible. In terms In terms of the humour, in terms of the humour, the incisive debate, the panache, it really had everything. So please, let's open it up. Who has some questions for the panel? You in the front with the...
I'd like to pose this question to the proposition. So you mentioned that, well, you seem to be pushing that the criminal justice system is something entirely separate. I believe the word was alien in the last speech to the communities. But is it not the communities that are a part of this criminal justice system that are like members of the police force, that are judges, that vote on the laws and the changes?
Well, I mean, first of all, what I'd like to say there is, just to use your wording, they're part of it, but it's been imposed upon them. The reason I say that it is alien is because so much of what our criminal justice system is, frankly, is not made in Northern Ireland. It's made in Whitehall, it's made in Downing Street, it's made in Westminster. We are not party to those decisions, especially not the level that we should be, especially not the level that communities provide. When it comes to addressing hate crimes, to bring it back to the question, I would much rather be dictated to by a smaller community rather than people with white hair in Whitehall who are deciding, oh yes, that sounds rather amazing to put in the criminal justice system. Because the fact of the matter is, that is what's happening right now. So yeah, to answer your question, although it's not alien insofar as it's very much part of the United Kingdom, it's alien to us because we play very, very little role in actually deciding what goes into the criminal justice system and the codes of laws.
Okay, thank you.
The way that proposition is trying to make all of this just appear is that every action that the community will decide upon will be absolute. It will make everyone happy. That just isn't the case. That just isn't how it would work. There's still going to be people that are upset by the decisions the community makes. And these communities might make these decisions that are way more rash and they will make way more people unhappy. But it's just that small amount of people in that community that it will make happy. But it still won't make the entire community happy. It's not an absolute. Nothing is ever an absolute happiness.
Is there anyone else?
Okay.
Okay, the back.
Thank you. Well, I've changed my mind about 6 times. So, I mean, the quality of the speakers, absolutely tremendous. But it's got me thinking. I was actually, and I'm on the opposition. I don't think communities address hate crime better. But it can't be done without the community. So the community has a role. The Judge Marnin, made 34 recommendations, I believe. 8 of them were about community restorative justice. Is there a role? And he's adamant there is a role. Now, again, this is a personal opinion, so if my boss was here, he might say, I disagree with this guy entirely, get him out. But in my view, how do I say it? If you were to put the 2 accredited restorative justice organisations onto a statutory footing, and that is, I believe, one of the recommendations. So if they were equal part of the criminal justice system, that's Alternatives NI and Community Restorative Justice Ireland, then I do think you've got the community-led way of dealing with it. Restorative justice won't solve everything. It's a voluntary process, okay, and at the minute, it's a voluntary organisation, as is NI Alternatives, so you're dependent on funding, all short-termism, no guarantees, and the community itself will have wide views. So if those 2 organisations were on statutory footing, I would suggest that the criminal justice system would be complete. I don't know what the views are. I don't even think that's a question, but I would welcome your thoughts.
So does anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, so you raise an excellent point in terms of if the criminal justice system had this, it might be even better. But at the end of the day, I can't say something about, if the fact of the matter remains that, I use the example of the Oregon Trail in my speech, we have seen instances where communities can perform acts of justice and address crimes where there is no justice system available. But as you rightly said, the community is integral to the justice system. So I think we have a situation in which the community can dole out justice in absence of a criminal justice system, but the criminal justice system, frankly, cannot survive without the communities. That's why I say that the communities are far better in addressing it, because frankly, they're far more integral to our conceptions of justice than the criminal justice system.
Does anybody else want to come back?
Just want to point out the fact that Luke said that the criminal justice system and communities work together, and that was my point. So thank you.
Walked into that.
Yeah, you did walk into that, didn't you? But no, obviously, at this debate, the restorative justice doesn't exist. It's not enshrined. What this debate is about is what is currently available for justice, and the only way you can get justice is with the criminal justice system. Communities can't. I'm sorry, I don't. So, community organizations are here, but you can only support the victims, and you can't. I am really floundering. You can't really get as much as you want. As nice as it would be to get justice through the community organizations, it's not available at this time. So the only way to go is the criminal justice system.
Just from a purely selfish journalistic point of view, I think what you raise probably merits about an hour of live radio debate. Absolutely. Sorry, and who else has a question?
Gentleman in the front.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
I just wanted to build on top of the audience members' point over there. To both houses, how would you go about making better liaison with communities? I think that's where the big gap is, especially in such a divisive place like Northern Ireland, is having those community liaison officers, which I know relies on funding, right? So I just want to open the floor to ideas. If anyone else has ideas in the audience as well, feel free to contribute.
Has anybody any ideas? The floor's open.
Take a stab.
You'll have a go.
Yeah, so you raise an excellent point about the need for community liaison officers, but I would go even a step further than that. We could have community liaison officers, but frankly, if we're going to go for it, we may as well go for it fully. I would say that we should actually develop different chambers of governance, not necessarily within the criminal justice system, but within our communities. You know, I love, you'll maybe learn this about me, but I do love the idea of the sort of classical Athenian agora. I think that would actually work quite well as a chamber of justice, where we have people coming together to vote on issues to bear the brunt of punishment. And so when we talk about funding for communities, I don't necessarily believe that we should fund them and still keep them on an inferior plane to the justice system in our worldview, because the fact of the matter is that they're actually more integral. So what I believe we should be doing is, I believe that if we're going to fund them, we should fund them absolutely. And in doing so, we should create chambers of collective governance, of collective punishment, and that way we could more effectively address hate crimes and more effectively make provision for victims of hate crimes.
Very good. Is there anyone else who has a question? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
So what you're saying is that we should improve the criminal justice system to include communities, yes, but to improve the criminal justice system so that we can better address it rather than just letting communities do it without having that reliance on the criminal justice system and funding from them.
Use the mic.
There's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think actually what you'll notice there is I didn't talk about improving the criminal justice system. I talked about setting up an organisation outside of the criminal justice system. I don't believe that you can, in the same way you shouldn't build upon shifting sand, I don't necessarily believe we can continue to build upon a flawed institution. What I said there was that we should create chambers outside of the criminal justice system to further strengthen our community values and further strengthen our ownership over punishment as a community. In that way, we would actually, in my opinion, we would have a far better and certainly more tolerant society, because we would all understand that we would all bear the brunt of punishment. So what I actually said there was not necessarily we should strengthen the criminal justice system, but that we should eschew it as far away from ourselves as possible and set up systems of democratic collective punishment.
So create like a pseudo criminal justice system?
Sorry?
Like a pseudo criminal justice system?
More parallel criminal justice.
But criminal justice system? You said criminal justice system. So.
One more.
Is there any more questions?
I think one thing we're missing out on is the fact that our criminal punishment system in the UK is quite it does revolve around punishment and rather not rehabilitation. And I think in the first instance, the police doesn't want to seek how do I put it? They don't want to help in the first place. They're there to do their job. They're there to arrest, and they're there to take care of the communities. But first and foremost, it's handing out punishment. That is their role, their intrinsic role.
Does anybody want to come back to that point or respond to that point? Do you want to respond to that point?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't help myself.
Yeah, I knew you wouldn't be able to.
I'm afraid I don't necessarily agree with that. With respect, that we are, as far as I'm aware, young man with an amazing football shirt on, by the way.
Long-suffering, I should say.
I know. We'll talk later. That's a separate issue. We could debate that all day. But we are, as far as I know, the police are still the only lawful authority in Northern Ireland and in the United Kingdom, so I'm going to start with that. But we realise and we accept and arrest and punitive measures are not the only. It's probably interesting to tell you that about 1,500 calls for service to the police every month are around mental health challenges. And we're not going to... Now, there are cases where arrest is appropriate, and we could talk about violence against women and girls, we could talk about serious crime, we could talk about serious and organised crime, we could talk about terrorism, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about hate crime. So I think that's, for me personally, I think that's disappointing to hear, and I can tell you that from my perspective, that's not the case. The other thing that I would like to say is, so Ballymena Pride, two things I wanted to tell you. Number one, we made 2 arrests. The first individual has been charged to court, and he's in court, I think, next month. The second thing is we've made another arrest. He's on bail pending further investigation. The important thing, and it probably marries up with both the proposition and the opposition, is that the community came out and helped clean that up before the parade began. So there's good in the world, and I would just ask you to just remember that. So that's it. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me again. Yeah, so first of all, I loved your point on Ballymena Pride there. What I'd like to point out is, yes, the community did come out and help it. Yes, they absolutely did. And you did make 2 arrests, yeah, but justice could have been seen much swifter, in the same way that the community cleaned up the streets so much faster than anyone else, if the justice had been left to be doled out by the community themselves. On the topic of the PSNI...
I know Sue Ann wants to come back to that.
Settle in.
We'll get a coffee with
Have I thought something? On the topic of the PSNI, and I think it's not necessarily a problem with the PSNI so much as it is an institutional problem with a lot of police services, is that yes, they are quite geared toward making arrests, but they're also very much, they wear many hats, I think is the correct term, which leaves them quite uncertain. They have incentives to arrest, yes, but they also have recourse to different, social services. Essentially, When you see a PSNI officer, you're seeing an armed officer, but you're also seeing sometimes a social worker, or in many cases, a domestic dispute. So like it's a role that can be very confused, but also one I believe we should certainly divest from. If we're going to talk about community justice, we should absolutely, although listen, we share a bond here, okay? We share a bond. I 100%. But at the end of the day, when we talk about community justice, it's also about community social work, and it's about taking away more of those sorts of extra roles from PSNI. So yeah, I mean, essentially, although you're right in saying that the Ballymena Pride, the justice system is taking its course right now, it's not taking it fast enough, frankly, and not nearly as fast as the community did.
Response from oppositioners?
Yeah, is there a response from the opposition?
I was just going to touch on the lovely officer's point. Sue, thank you. Sounded weird there. But I just want to say, bridging community organizations and then Department of Justice, Justice Department, PSNI, I would have never found out about what you're talking about. Was it 1,300 calls a month or something about 1,500 about mental health? I was one of those calls. I wouldn't have known about the organization that I was referred to without the PSNI, because they gave me a card and they let me. So
This is the podcast that got away.
So, if I could maybe just add to the comments of my colleague Sue, because I feel that some of the conversations around, I always get a bit nervous around when we talk about communities doing anything, because it can be both a positive and a very negative thing. And actually, for me, as I sit and listen to the commentary here, I mean, I consider myself to be a member of 4 or 5 communities. I have a family community, I have a friend community, I have a church community, and I also have a police community because I've been involved in policing for almost 40 years. And I've seen firsthand how communities address hate crime both positively and negatively. And actually, the 6 young people in front of us, you are the future of Northern Ireland. So it's encouraging that you have views on this, albeit you don't necessarily agree. But I think, and apologies if this has been said, because I had to nip out of the room a couple of times, but actually, the thing for me, when the criminal justice system become involved in hate crime, society has failed people. That should be the last resort. It should never get to that point. And communities need to step up. Individuals need to step. Every single person in this room has a personal responsibility. And sometimes when we come to these events, we kind of blame everybody else. If only they did this or they did that. But every single person here has a personal responsibility to influence, to be an active bystander, to challenge behaviour, to call it out when it needs to be. And I include myself in that when I say that. So thank you.
Is there anyone else would like to speak or would like to join in the discussion?
Yes, I think a massive round of applause is due for the 6 speakers we had again on this stage. And as you were saying there, we all also have a personal responsibility to uphold the kind of pillars of discourse, discussion, and debate in this room, so that we can talk about these issues. That's something that's very important. So I'd now like to invite Mandy to give her closing comments on our debate today before we go to our final vote on speakerability.
Well, look, anyone who knows me will know that I can actually be highly critical. But in this particular instance today, I have just been blown away by today's event. And I have to say, quite humblingly so, that I always saw myself as belonging to a golden era of debate at Queen's University 30 years ago. But the standard of debate in this room today has blown me away. It has everything. It had humour. It had amazing storytelling. It had an ability to draw together so many different complex strands because we are dealing with such a complex subject. To be able to draw all those strands together the way that our debaters have is just brilliant. I mean, personally, and I probably shouldn't admit this, but I will always, I suppose, be in the trenches. I'm a journalist who will always want to be in the front line, will always want to be with the community workers or the youth workers, the beating heart of the community. I will always passionately believe that one community worker can change the whole course of someone's life. I would also be a huge advocate for mental health. But I think what has come out in the debate today is that while the community is the beating heart, obviously, as some of the debaters so rightfully put, it can be very impulsive. There's a lot of emotions involved. So I mean, both sides have put forward such a high level of argument, and so I'm just going to say, can we just open it up now and vote on who you think was the best, because they were all brilliant in my eyes.
Thank you. So yes, that's right. Just to run over the vote on speakerability again, this is not the side which you personally agree with the most. This is the side you thought spoke the best based on their presentation, rhetoric, argument, teamwork and engagement. So can I have all those who would like to vote for the proposition on speakerability raise their hands now?
Don't vote with your heart, vote with your head.
Yep. 1, 2. Okay, we have 11. And can I have all those who would like to vote for the opposition on speakerability raise their hands now? Okay, that is 30 for the opposition. And finally, can I have all those who would like to abstain please raise their hands now? Okay, that is 4. So I'm pleased to announce that the results from the vote on speakerability, that the opposition carry at 30-11. Congratulations. And finally, before I hand it back to Mandy for the rest of the agenda for this event, I just want to say and acknowledge all the hard work that's went into it. Misha and I came to Michael and the Victim Support NI team in May of 2024. And whenever we were kind of discussing our ideas of a debate, we never thought that it would take off as much as it had today. So I can speak on behalf of Misha and the whole team to say, I'm incredibly proud of how today has turned out. So thank you very much for all of your support. And I think it's something to be proud of as well, that the Lurific and Victim Support NI can work together to give victims a voice, to let people share their experiences, that hate crime isn't a taboo topic, but it's something that we can discuss, and that together through this discussion, this discourse and this dialogue done in the right way, respectfully, that we can come to a solution on this prevalent issue. So finally, I'd just like to thank everyone involved, Misha, the Victim Support NI team, Michael, the Crescent Arts Centre team, and once again to our 2 guest chairs, Mandy McAuley and Professor Kevin Brown, and finally to the 6 young people that stand with me on this stage. So thank you very much for having us. And as a closing remark, the fun doesn't stop here. If you would like to join us in the McMorty Hall, we are having the 3rd debate of today, which actually has a link to some of the themes that we discussed. It is This House Believes Masculinity is Inherently Toxic at 7 p.m. at the old McMorty Hall. You're more than welcome to see some of our fine speakers and an exhibition of chamber debating, and that goes as an extension and an invite for all society events that you're welcome at Lurific. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back over to Mandy. Thank you.